Hey, folks, in this interview, I'm talking with Joe Edelman. We're going to be covering a very, very important topic, and that's demystifying the myth around full frame versus smaller sensors like APS-C and Micro Four Thirds. It's coming your way next. This is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I am your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today, prepare to have your mind blown, hopefully. We're going to be talking with Joe Edelman, who knows his way around a camera or two or three, and photography probably better than I will ever know it. But he's agreed to come on and talk to me about some of the just vitriol and disinformation and misinformation that's floating around there regarding sensor sizes and what you should buy. So, Joe Edelman, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
I'm great, Frederick. Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be back here chatting with you, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I feel honored to have you on. Whenever I have you on,
thank you. The honor is mine, really.
Yeah, no, this is good. So let's dive in. So you shoot Olympus cameras right now.
I do.
Previously you didn't. You switched over to Olympus. Before we dive into the whole sensor size discussion, tell us the impetus and the reasoning behind the switch from one system to the other.
Wow. It was kind of a wake-up call. I was a Nikon guy for 43 years. I make no secret of that. Just over 42. But shot Nikon for film, started with the D1 in 2000. And I did what most people do. New camera came out. It was bigger. It was better. And at first it kind of made a lot of sense. You went from the little sensor in the D1 to APS-C, and then you had full frame. That was all revolutionary. But then, just kind of played zombie, and every time a new one came out, changed.
Yep.
And this little company, you might have heard of them, called Sony.
I heard of them, yeah.
They kind of started to really make mirrorless, I think, a little bit more well-known, because obviously Olympus was around before that, but I won't lie, I never paid a lot of attention. And I got my hands on a Sony, tried it out, kind of really liked it, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to go. And so I didn't sell the Nikon gear, but I bought some Sony gear, used it for best part of 8 months. Liked a lot of things about it, most importantly, loved having an EVF. So I completely fell in love with the electronic viewfinder.
Yeah. Just the WYSIWYG of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And at the time, in Sony's defense, before I say the rest of this was pretty early on. So they only had like 4 lenses. I've never been a fan of an adapter for anything, period. Because unfortunately, I'm old enough that, I was around back in the day where, you had to put adapters on just about anything, and it was always hard. It just never worked well. So, that bothered me. And actually my biggest struggle with the Sony, which is kind of just a personal thing, it's going to be different for everybody, it was the ergonomics. I was just never able to get comfortable with the ergonomics. And that's why I stuck with Nikon so long. I mean, come on, we all know in the early 2000s, Nikon came out with the D1 first. Yeah. But then for like the next 6 years, Canon kind of just mopped the floor with Nikon. And that's when you started, at sporting events and news events, that's when you started seeing all the white lenses, because everybody was jumping ship, going to Canon. I just never liked the ergonomics on Canon cameras. I was comfortable with what Nikon did, the way they did it. And so I gave up on the Sony experiment and started this crazy thing on YouTube that I do. And
congratulations on that, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Exploding there.
Pretty early on, I was kind of given a nod from YouTube, and I got to spend some time at YouTube Space in New York. And they turned me on to the Panasonic cameras for video. And this was during the time of the GH4. Literally had 3 of them. Had never shot a single still frame on any of them. They're strictly for video. Yeah. And the day that my GH5 arrived, I was bored. Didn't really want to work. So I unpacked it. I said, everybody says this stuff is so good, except some say it's so bad. So let's go find out. So I literally went out to the park and just shot pictures of the GH5 for an afternoon and came back, downloaded them, and started looking. And it's like, okay, what's everybody complaining about? I don't get it. This is actually really pretty impressive, fun camera to work with. So I started doing research. Took me about a year and a half, going back and forth. After 40 plus years, just completely bailing on, that whole ecosystem was tough. It was a pretty quick choice for me between the Panasonic and the Olympus to look at the Olympus, mainly because of ergonomics. Yeah. The standard Google searching that I was finding at the time was, oh, video do Panasonic, stills, look at Olympus. I don't disagree with any of that, but at the same time, I think both systems do great work.
They're both incredible, yeah.
At this point, I do all my video with Olympus. It works great for my needs. Certainly, Panasonic was a little more video-centric from the get-go, so there's a lot more third-party, gadgetry and accessories available for Panasonic than there is Olympus. But I've been doing great stuff with it. So that's, kind of what got me there.
Isn't it interesting, though? It's interesting, and by the way, you're looking at me on a GH4, a Lumix GH4 right now with a 12 to 35 mil lens on it, racked out to 2.8, which is why all that looks soft.
This is a micro 4/3 this weekend photo because you're looking at me on an OMD EM1 Mark II from Olympus.
Look at that. Look at that. See, and everything's working fine. It's interesting. That you drew that path, and looking at my own path and the gear that I've purchased and own, and we were talking about this a little bit before. Even my phone, man, like most of the stuff that I own, I've barely scratched the surface of what it can do. Yet when the next version of that thing comes out, I feel inadequate if I don't have it. Right. And we're in the same boat with cameras, right? It's the same deal. If you don't, if Olympus or Lumix or Nikon or Canon or Fuji comes out with a new camera and you have the number before that one, you're somehow lesser of a photographer that day. Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's true. It's like this peer pressure thing more than anything. I mean, you look at Apple, you got to give them a ton of credit for really, I think, in the modern era, creating the fanboy mentality. Sony, hands down, they win the race. They managed to kind of capture that fanboy thought process, with their gear. And I'm not saying it wasn't deserving of it, but they certainly captured it, did a great job with that. But yeah, I think, with social media and all that kind of stuff, we get that peer pressure. You kind of don't want to be left out. Certainly a new camera comes out. That's what all the discussion's about. That's what everybody's talking about. Unfortunately, I think that's a really bad thing. Yeah. But, it's okay to have a little bit of excitement. But yeah, we
like shiny things. I mean, we're human, right?
And all kind of stuff. It's like, come on.
But yeah, humans like shiny new things, new toys. I think where it gets a little caustic and dangerous is when, because photography is interesting because depending on the genre of photography you're doing, like if you're shooting models, right, there's psychology involved, then, your interaction with the model. You have to be technically proficient on your gear under pressure because you're the running the show. And then there's the gear itself, all the nerdity of the gear and understanding, that's a new word, nerdity, and understanding what it can do. And you have to do all that stuff. And then what, the danger of it is, you sit on YouTube or on wherever, and you get sucked into this vortex of, this guy was really passionate, used a lot of capital letters and exclamation points saying my gear sucks. So I should really go consider that other gear. And everyone's saying smaller sensors are inferior for a variety of reasons, bokeh, focusing, yada, yada, yada. So I'm just getting into photography. I'm going to stand on the shoulders of giants and buy what they say buy. Do you see that same dynamic?
Oh, absolutely. But wait a second. Just to make sure that I understand what you just said, are you telling me that Micro Four Thirds isn't dead? Really?
It's not dead.
Because I could have sworn I saw something about that somewhere.
Yeah. Micro Four Thirds is dead. Newsflash, Micro Four Thirds is not dead.
I think, believe me, for the last 3 years since I started this YouTube thing, I have tried desperately to really get my head wrapped around the gear mentality on YouTube. And so there's a couple things that I have to say. So first of all, I will say, I've said it public, I'm going to say it on your show because I stand by it. The gentleman who made that proclamation, I have a tremendous amount of respect for his ability as a photographer and also for his proven ability as a photo educator. What drives me insane, and certainly I can't even begin to speak to his motives because I don't know his exact motives, but as I observe what he does, it really seems like he's just going after the views and going after the quick bucks with his videos, because what I don't see him doing anymore is I don't see him actually helping photographers. I see him generating a lot of anxiety. And here's where I see the anxiety coming from, and I relate it to car owners. So I was never much of a motorhead. right? I was a nerd that was into cameras early. So like, as long as my car got me from point A to point B, I didn't care.
Yeah.
So, but I knew people that were motorheads. I know people that were in their cars, especially back in the day when I grew up, you had a Chevy, you had a Ford, and there was no compromising on which was better. It was either or, right?
Right.
And so I think a big piece of what happens from a social and a psychology standpoint, these are things that we invest a lot of money into. And then when we invest money into them, we also invest a lot of time and a lot of heart and passion goes into them.
Yep.
So who wants to be told that they bought the wrong thing?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
that there's something better than what they have. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that, Sony kind of managed to capitalize on that a little bit. And again, good for them. I mean, strictly from a business and marketing standpoint, good for them, right? And they did it with good gear. But I do see a lot of, YouTubers, a lot of photo educators, a lot of even, the blogs at the same time. They get more views. They get talked about more. Obviously more views or more reads on a blog, that means more advertising dollars, et cetera. But what it's not doing is it's not teaching people how to take better pictures. And as a result, we're kind of creating this cultural phenomenon where, especially for people coming into, this world of photography, you're not going to take a better picture by learning photography. You're going to take a better picture by getting a better camera. That's what's becoming.
That's
the
where
norm.
it is, or getting a bigger sensor, right? What you talked about, I call like that investment that you make, whether it's money and convincing the spouse and the time learning how to use this gear and all this stuff. I call that digital Stockholm syndrome, right? Because you're
I agree.
And it crosses over. It's not just photography. It's golf clubs, it's cars, it's religion, it's politics, it's everywhere, right? It's if I invest in this thing and I spend a lot of time on this thing, who are you to tell me I'm wrong? Because I've invested, right? So what's the cure to that? What's the cure to that Stockholm syndrome and swinging the pendulum back towards art again and away from, hey, this latest and greatest whiz bang feature?
So interestingly enough, I don't know. That's the short answer, but I do have some speculation. I stumbled on an article this past weekend. I was out in Michigan and I had some downtime sitting in a hotel during a conference, and I stumbled on an article on CNBC, and it was talking about how earnings are down dramatically for all the major camera manufacturers. In fact, our brands, Panasonic and Olympus, got a passing mention, but of course they talked about, the big four, Canon, Nikon, Sony, and they had Fuji included in that group. Canon and Nikon struggling horrendously, Sony doing pretty good, but still, all of that camera stuff, which we all talk about like it's the, biggest thing in the world, is an incredibly small portion of their business. And Sony's all about the sensors. Sony's making money off of sensors. And of course there's entertainment and electronics. But what it came down to is, they were talking in this article about how the one company, based on their metrics, that is in the most danger right now is Nikon. Because Nikon relies on the camera business more than some of the others, and their camera business is hurting more than the others. Canon, of course, is branched out into printers and all kind of scientific stuff. And while Nikon does have some of the medical and the optics, in past years, a lot of that's been eroded away by companies like Olympus, et cetera. So, it got me thinking, to try and answer your question, that maybe we wind up actually indeed losing some of these camera companies. And maybe that's where the dust settles, because as much as I could never imagine just taking pictures with an iPhone, the simple fact of the matter is the phone technology is just insane.
It's ridiculous.
And it's continuing to get better and better and better and better. So we're reaching a point where there's a really good argument that says, if I'm a beginner, if I'm just somebody that enjoys the idea of having good pictures and thinks it would be fun to be able to take pictures whenever I want, et cetera, well, do I really need to go buy a Canon or a Nikon or a Sony or any other brand? Why can't I just do that with my phone? So I actually think, and maybe this is 10 years out, but I think we're at a point where digital is going to begin to settle. I do think that Canon, Nikon, even Panasonic with their full frames, Fuji, they're going to have to start focusing on getting things smaller again, physically smaller. I mean, maybe, my argument would be, hey, if full frame sensors are here to stay, that's fine, but they've got to figure out a way to get the camera smaller. Yeah. Because things are getting bigger and heavier, and the lenses have to get lighter. So I think that, there's a good possibility we will reach a point again where we were in the 90s. And in the 90s, you had little compact film cameras that the amateur would buy, or you had, like the disposables and that kind of stuff, and that's what they would use. But then you had SLRs for film that required some advanced learning and some advanced effort. Yeah. Right? I think it's feasible that we get back to a point like that.
I think you're right, because if you look at it, like, yeah, the size sort of shift and sort of the pendulum swinging back in the other direction towards smaller cameras, absolutely, but also factor in there humans, right, and attrition and gentrification, or whatever you want to call it, where
all of those things,
all of the whatever big words, and it's like you look at the people, the younger people, generation, whatever you want to call them, that are coming up now, that are accustomed to extremely high quality imagery coming off a tiny little device. And like you said, it's only getting better and better. People with these giant cameras are going to be like, hey, nice Model T Ford you got there, as they drive their Tesla away, right?
Absolutely. Well, even, along with that, I have this conversation every camera club event that I go to. So this weekend I was in Michigan at the Southwest Michigan Camera Club Council. It's their annual, get together. And I asked the question just to see if it's different somewhere. And the question is, how are you folks finding new members? Like, are you finding that you can't get younger members in their 20s and 30s? Because I see, when I go to these events, a lot of gray-haired people. Yeah. And pretty much universally, with the exception of Southern Florida, every place I go, they whine and complain and fret that their groups are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they can't interest younger people. Down in Southern Florida, they had the best answer ever. I have to tell this because it's hysterical. Yeah. Last year I was there. I asked the gentleman who was the president of the organization, do you guys have a hard time finding new members? And he looked at me deadpan and said, not at all. We just find new old people. This was a group in Fort Myers, Florida, which is, Retirement Community USA, right? That's awesome. But I think there's a correlation to what you're talking about there with the younger generation, in that we already have, if you look into the world of marketing, marketers have tons and tons and tons of research already that's published. You read about it in newspaper articles and magazine articles every day. Millennials and Generation Zers are interested and will invest time and money in experience. Yeah, yeah. They don't care about the tangibles. They definitely don't want to be told, these are the rules. This is the way you have to do it. They don't want to have to enter contests with their pictures. They don't want that. They do want the social element behind photography. They like the idea of a club or a meetup, but they want to be able to be social and go places and do things with other people. Yeah. So I think you put those together. Yeah. I mean, the fact that these companies are making things that are bigger and heavier, that's not going to fly once this younger generation reaches the point where they're the primary spenders. Yeah. And what else I wonder is it's a myriad of different factors in there, but I wonder if just the idea of photography is going to become antiquated. The idea, and let me make a point. So the idea of understanding intrinsically the exposure triangle, f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, all these things that you and I learned, standing in front of an enlarger and getting fixer in our blood and all that stuff, the stuff that makes you, quote, a photographer, and then, running out and learning how to change film and load film and all that stuff is gone, right? And as cameras and phones get smarter and smarter and smarter, they're removing the necessity to understand that stuff. I mean, look at your iPhone. Like your iPhone with its portrait mode, we used to have to work hard to get that level of bokeh, right? And now you can say, whatever, click. Oh, stand farther back. Okay, boom, click, and you got it. So do you think it's going away, the necessity to be skilled at photography? Well, I don't think it's going away, but I think it's going to change. right? I mean, again, if we look backwards to kind of look forwards, I think there's a great argument that says, sure, maybe 10 or 15 years from now, there are going to be top of their game professional photographers that are in their 20s or 30s that don't understand depth of field and don't understand the exposure triangle. But that will be a result not of what I complain about now, and that's people being lazy, because with today's technology, you still need it. But I think it's going to be the result of humans still driving technology forward. And like so many things throughout history, there's certainly a good likelihood that we get to a point where, let's face it, physics are physics. That can't be changed. Yeah. But we can certainly change the way we interact with the physics, the way we manage the physics, and even the way we understand it, because we have different ways to manipulate it. Just like, you know, I love the Apple commercial. Did you just poke on my kid? Yeah, I saw that. So just the fact now that, you know, a little pinch, boom, that person's out of the picture. They're blurry. So I think there's definitely that possibility that, while obviously today I travel the country and I argue with people, look, you have to understand the inverse square law. You have to understand depth of field. Is there a good argument that the technology advances to where we approach it in a completely different way? Sure. And you know, a lot of people in my generation would be like, oh, that's going to be the worst thing ever. I'm sorry. I think that'll be amazing if it does. I think right now, for all of these challenges we're discussing, I think this is the most exciting time ever to be a photographer. The technology that's available to us is incredible. The features, the ease of doing things. I think it's amazing. It is.
It's ridiculously amazing. And it's the other part of it is the mechanism, like let's call it back in the day, let's call it 20, 30 years ago, right? Where if you took a photo, not a whole lot of people would see that photo, no matter how long you worked on making it the best photo.
I had an audience of one.
Right. Yeah. It's like, look at what I did. And now you can take a shot with a supercomputer in your hand or one of these great cameras that we have, and people can appreciate it by the thousands and millions instantly, right? So you have this instant audience to tell stories to. And like you said, Joe, we have these amazing tools to tell these stories. So the only missing thing where that laziness that you mentioned comes in is getting your butt out of the seat, grabbing that gear and telling stories with your gear. Stop talking about micro four thirds versus full frame versus this. Get out there and make a story, dude. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I made a comment on my TWiP show just about a year ago, and it was meant to not be that nice. But I had a guy that was just driving me crazy with these gear questions, and finally I was like, dude, you are not a photographer. You are a gear-tographer. All you care about is the gear, and it was not meant to be a compliment at all. And a couple days later, I ran into someone that saw the show, and they said, you know, I love that line. You should even trademark that line. But I do want to point out to you, there are some people where their pleasure is derived from the gear, the toys. Yeah. And he's right. So I still use the phrase geartographer, but I always preface it. But indeed, the people that want to actually get good at photography, they got to use the camera. You simply have to pick up the camera. I mean, I know for a fact, I'm the only guy on YouTube that tells people, please don't watch my videos. Use my videos as a resource. Nice. If you don't understand the inverse square law, go watch the video on it. But then pick up your camera and try it, because don't think that you understand it just because you watch my video. You need to go and put that technique to use, right? Yep. I mean, I get it in today's world. We're all so busy. We all multitask. So, you know, we try to learn on the fly when we can, but it amazes me how many people I meet that have thousands and thousands of dollars invested in camera gear, and really the extent of their photography is dreaming about it while they watch videos. And it's really, really unfortunate, because at least for me, look, I love teaching. I love talking about photography. I'll do that anytime, any day. But it's about taking pictures. Yeah, it is. I love to be able to take pictures.
Let's look at it from a different perspective, right? Yeah. So this is related to what we were talking about before, but it's the we were in that whole megapixel race, or we're kind of still in the megapixel race. I thought we were out of the megapixel race, but they keep pulling us back in. We're back in the megapixel race. And like you mentioned, Panasonic with the S1 full frame camera, and Fuji released a GFX, their GFX 100, which is 100 whatever megapixels, right? And 10 grand to boot on top of that.
Right.
How do you advise people that are looking at, and they have, let's say money is no object. They're, some sort of professional that they can buy whatever the heck they want.
Right.
And they're like, Joe, I want to take photos. I'm not exactly sure what I want to shoot, but I want to get the best of the best. I drive the most expensive Tesla. I live in the best neighborhood. I buy the best clothes, and I got to have the best of the best camera, but I'm not sure what I want to shoot. Would you advise that person to, hey, dude, go 10 grand, go get yourself that Fuji and a couple of lenses? Or would you say stick on the Micro Four Thirds side?
Here, I'll give you the answer that I give people since I became an Olympus visionary, because obviously people anticipate right away I'm going to say, oh, yeah, go buy Olympus. And that's actually not what I say. In fact, I made it very clear to Olympus when they approached me about being a brand ambassador that because of the work that I do and the way that I teach, that I'm not going to be one of those people that's just constantly beating a drum that says buy, buy, buy. Obviously, I'm going to beat the drum and tout how much I love my gear because I do. Yeah. So my goal in that process is to make people what I call Olympus curious. And here's why that's important to me.
Oh, curious? Okay.
Oh, curious. There you go. So, because even for the Sony user, if I can make a Sony user Olympus curious, it's not about getting them to switch. It's about the next time Sony comes out with a 75 megapixel camera for $4,500, hopefully they'll remember what Joe Edelman does with a 24 megapixel Micro Four Thirds camera and ask themselves, do I really need that camera? If they are highly invested in the Sony system and they have their lenses, they love what they're doing, awesome. But if I can make them Olympus curious, just like, the billboard that I entered that contest to get a billboard done with my photos. So I've got a Micro Four Thirds shot on a 48-foot wide by 14-foot tall billboard right now.
Wow.
And it's tack sharp. So, what I do is I tell people, look, especially if you live in the United States, it is a little tougher in some parts of the world. But if you live in the United States, number one, of course, do your research. Feel free to talk to other photographers, but understand any photographer is ultimately going to tell you what they like to use.
Yep.
But then what you need to do, especially when you look at what this gear is going to cost you, spend a couple $100 and rent the camera that you're thinking about with a lens. I mean, you can go to places like, lensrentals.com or borrowlenses.com, and rentals are dirt cheap. Or at a minimum, find a local retailer because, folks, we still need those local retailers. I love Amazon. I'm convinced my portrait's hanging in the lobby in Washington, for Prime user.
Oh, yeah. Right next to mine.
Right. I shop at, B&H and Adorama out of convenience at times. Absolutely. But the fact of the matter is the local retailers have so much to offer. And a big part of that actually is education and access to knowledge that you can't get online. And they are invested in your success as a photographer because they want you to come back. So they're not looking for the quick sale. They're not just looking at you as a number. They want to build a relationship with you. So at a minimum, go to a local retailer and they may not let you take the camera home for a weekend or they may not be able to rent it, but take a disc. Try the camera out there. They're going to be willing to jump through hoops to let you test that camera as much as possible.
Yeah.
And then make the right decision. Because, Frederick, so much of buying a camera, and unfortunately this gets left out of all these YouTube videos that are all about gear and the latest and the greatest. You hardly ever hear people talk about ergonomics.
Right.
You hardly ever hear people talk about how's the camera laid out? How's it fit? When's the last time you ever saw a YouTube video about a new camera where that YouTuber said, hey, you know what? I have really big hands, so this camera would be great for me. But if you have small hands, I would think twice before you pick up this camera.
That's right.
Have you ever heard that? You've never heard it.
No, never heard it.
So all these people are doing is spouting off the crap that you can read in the spec sheets. They're not really actually, even with these gear reviews, they're not actually helping people.
Yeah.
What they're not doing is they're not putting themselves in the end user's shoes. They're not trying to imagine their audience and what kinds of obstacles and questions do they have and try to answer them. They're just talking about, oh, this is best, and let's drop a bunch of really cool words like inverse square law or whatever, and that's it. There's no explanation. There's no real help involved.
Yeah,
so honestly, that was a long answer. I apologize. But for me, I tell people, look, do some research, but then you got to try it. You got to try camera. It's a big investment.
Yeah, it's not only ergonomics that you mentioned, it's also the UI UX of the camera, because it could fit your hand perfectly, and then when you go into the menuing system, you're like, holy hell, I'm lost. I have no idea.
Yep.
You know. So,
and part of the menu system, I mean, let's face it, Olympus has taken some grief in the past for menu systems. I think right now Sony's probably at the top of the heap for people complaining on menus.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I find it humorous in the sense, though, that honestly, because I've used them all. And at the end of the day, there's this thing called the instructions. You kind of need to read them because we don't actually use cameras anymore. You know, we kind of kid ourselves when we call them cameras. They're computers that take pictures, which is awesome. But you got to be willing to put in the effort. You know, it's funny. People will go get in the car, they'll push the button, they'll turn the key, and they never think, how do I drive this car? They just don't. They think about the traffic, the directions, but there's no thought about how do I operate this vehicle. But yet they'll spend almost as much in camera gear, and they still don't know how to use it.
Yeah, and they won't read the manual because how complicated could it be? You know, there's a button, you press the button, it takes a picture. Of course, right? So, yeah, no, it's crazy. It is crazy. I'm going to let you go. I know you got things to do, but I want to wrap this up with two things. A bit of information. I don't know if you knew this because you mentioned that you're a primaholic. Did you know? And maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but did you know that you could dive into your account on Amazon and there's a little link in there that will tell you how much you've spent since joining Amazon?
My wife's not around. Yeah. No, I know that.
You will cry. You will cry.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It adds up. It adds up.
I could not do that. Like, literally, that would just ruin probably my year.
Don't do it. And then the last question for you is, knowing what you know in your experience and, you know, your cutting edge online YouTube channel, your shooting, Olympus Visionary, all that stuff, what is a camera... Like, what's missing from cameras today? If you could sit down, let's say with the Olympus team, if you could sit down in a closed door room with the Olympus team and design the ideal Joe Edelman series camera, what would be in it? What would be different than what you have now?
Wow. So, okay, actually, that's kind of easy for me. So, and I'll even say something that's not 100% politically correct as an Olympus visionary, but I'll be honest. I think the perfect camera for me, and I think it's probably not too far down the road. I have no inside knowledge, but and when I say too far, I mean years, couple of years. It's a camera like the EM1X, which of course is the newer camera, with specifically more built-out capabilities with the artificial intelligence. But at the point which we will get to, it's gotten smaller, closer in size to the EM1 Mark II. So I'll admit, when the EM1X came out, which to me is one of the most amazing cameras ever, but I'll explain why. It's not because I'm an Olympus guy. It's actually because of what it's going to force the industry to do. That's why I think that this camera
you got to share that. Incredible. You got to share that. But,
you know, for me, I fell in love with the ergonomics on the EM1 Mark II. Just fell in love with it. So, of course, the EM1X, a little bit bigger, there's a trade-off. But the trade-off is that if you imagine the potential of this artificial intelligence technology, I mean, not to mention so many other cool features they put in, but just the artificial intelligence alone, it's insane because, and Olympus has not told us, even as a visionary, I don't have the inside track, but we can imagine since they started out with planes, trains, and automobiles, right? That's what they started with.
Yeah.
But we can imagine a day not too far down the road where they have built out an AI, let's say for people that want to shoot flowers. Okay, so if you're into flowers, you would be able to essentially, just like you do a firmware upgrade, download the AI for flowers and upload that to the camera, and maybe you remove trains if you never shoot trains, that type of thing. I think the more that this concept of the artificial intelligence gets built out, the more we get to the point where you literally are potentially going to be able to stop thinking in real time about so much of how to operate a camera. Because at the same time, as we parallel this conversation, let's face it, you know, exposure systems are getting better. Autofocus accuracy in general, you know, is getting better. Smaller sensors, I hate to tell some folks, they're getting better. You know, a sensor, look at what Apple did with the iPhone. A sensor doesn't have to get bigger or have more pixels to generate a better image.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, software is included in that process, and I hate to say that 100 megapixel Fuji camera still requires great software to create that great 100 megapixel image. So there's advancements coming all the way. What a lot of people failed to listen to and try to understand, because obviously the EM1X is nowhere near as big as people, were blowing up about, but it's the biggest Olympus camera ever. Part of the reason for that is the camera's got 2 processors in it. Processors generate heat. So they had to build in more space and more dissipation capabilities to get rid of that heat. Otherwise, they would have had a Sony scenario with cameras overheating. The best part of it is, how many things or how many times have you heard about an Olympus EM1X overheating? You haven't at all, right? So they did a good job. They did a really good job, but that came at the price of a little bit of space. So obviously, they're going to get better at that. They're going to get better at making the processor smaller, generating less heat, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's kind of, I think my ideal camera is the one that the EM1X showed us is possible, because the EM1X now, when you're looking at 7.5 stops of image stabilization and the ability to do neutral density filters built into the camera without actually using a filter.
Yeah, which is
nuts. This is all technology now that all the other companies are out there working on, because historically, if we go back, there's so many of the popular features today. Olympus was the first company that had them.
Yeah.
Right. And so, they were the first now with this artificial intelligence, the first with Live ND. This is the kind of stuff that pushes the whole industry, and that's good for everybody.
Yeah. You know what I want?
Most about it.
If you're going to ask me what I want for my ideal camera, I don't know what the camera looks like or anything, but what I want in it is a couple of things. I want a cellular modem in it. I want to be able to shoot and tether to any place in the world from wherever I am. My phone can do it. How come my supercomputer camera can't do it, right? So I want a cell chip, the option to put a cell chip in the modem or in the camera. Secondly, I want computational photography style smarts, kind of like what you're saying, in the camera, kind of what the iPhone can do with this bokeh that wasn't there.
Okay,
and it
so
kind of
processing tools, right?
Processing tools, cool. Yeah. And then along with that, an app store, a real app store that I can pull up my camera and say, you know what? Joe Edelman released a cool tool that will make doing astrophotography simple.
Okay.
I want to download this Joe Edelman app, and put it on my phone, my camera, and go to town with it, right?
Sign me up. That sounds awesome.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that totally sounds awesome. And I think actually even your phone request, that might be closer than we think. I mean, well, actually, even the EM1X has full Wi-Fi, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. Honestly, the only downside to that, in my opinion, is that 5 gigahertz is still not as fast as we ideally want. Like if we're going to shoot wireless tethered. But it's awesome to be able to shoot tethered, no wires, and it's not Bluetooth. It's like straight up Wi-Fi. But obviously, we're still limited by the fact that the fastest Wi-Fi that's commercially available is 5 gigahertz. Yeah. So, I mean, I could totally see it.
I think it's all coming. It just seems logical to me that you do that. I mean, imagine a scenario where you're a wedding shooter, right? And you're able to shoot. Obviously, you're going to shoot RAW plus JPEG or whatever, but you're able to have the images that you're shooting be uploaded somewhere else, or even if you take it more extreme, you're on, Mount Kilimanjaro, and there happens to be a cell signal up there, and now you're shooting, and people can see what you're shooting instantly, real time.
Cool. So you should go trademark the phrase cloud camera. Right? There it is. You have the first camera that just uploads to the cloud. That's cool, actually.
You heard it here first. You heard it here first, bro.
Yeah, there you go.
So, Joe, what's next for you, man? I know you're jumping on a plane soon. You're going to parts unknown.
Actually, jumping on a plane tomorrow to take my first vacation in about 3 years. And so I'm going to Las Vegas, where I understand they are being inundated with migrating grasshoppers right now.
Yes, I heard about the grasshoppers.
So can't wait for that. But next up for me, I'm down in Austin, Texas next week for an Olympus weekend at Precision Camera. And then an event down in Charlotte, and then Photo Plus is coming up. Of course, gotta love Photo Plus, so I'll be presenting for Olympus there. Looking forward to it.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we could talk for hours. I think we will. When we sit down and have a beer or something, we're going to talk for hours about this stuff.
Indeed.
There's so much to talk about. We scratched the surface of this small sensor, large sensor, blah, 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 blah stuff, right? Yep. So, in the end, use whatever the heck you want to use. Just shoot. Yeah. Get out there and put some mileage on that finger, right?
Have fun. That's it, man. Yep.
All right. Joe, where's your channel at and where's your website at?
Easiest to find it through my website. It's joeedelman.com, JoeEdelman.com. And the YouTube channel is Photo Joe Edelman, PHOTO.
All right, perfect. Joe Edelman, thank you, man. I'll talk to you next time.
Frederick, thank you so much. Take care.
Okay,
bye now.
Safe travels. This is TWiP.